So in that passage, we find Jesus beginning his public ministry with a journey into the wilderness, a place of solitude, a place of simplicity, a place of fasting. It's here in the desolate quiet that Jesus prepares for his mission, and he encounters temptation as he does so. I don't know about you, but when we think about wilderness, I often imagine isolation, difficulty, confusion. But for Jesus, the wilderness is where he finds clarity and strength and a deeper connection with the Holy Spirit and with heaven. Today, we will reflect on how the wilderness, marked by solitude, simplicity, and fasting, is not something for us to fear, but is an invitation for us to draw closer to God. We begin in verse 1. Jesus, full of the Holy Spirit, left the Jordan and was led by the Spirit into the wilderness. Solitude is one of the defining features of the journey that Jesus took into the wilderness. Jesus is led by the Holy Spirit into a place of isolation, aloneness, away from the noise and the distractions of society. The wilderness in biblical times was a barren and fruitless, isolated place, far from the bustling cities, the crowded streets. It was the perfect setting for solitude. And for Jesus, this was not just a one-off. It tells us in the following chapter, Luke 5 and verse 16, that Jesus often withdrew to lonely places in order to pray. Solitude, especially in our world today, is often seen as uncomfortable. We live in a world that values busyness and multitasking and constant connectivity. How many of us travelled here today to church with a phone which we struggle not to look at for any length of time? To be alone without distraction can feel unsettling. But the wilderness teaches us that solitude is a sacred place. It's where we are stripped of all external influences and are left face to face with the reality of ourselves as we really are, and ultimately the reality of our Creator, who sustains our every moment. Jesus, in his time of solitude, was not avoiding the world. He was not running away from what he had come to do, his mission. Instead, he was carving out time to pray, to reflect, to centre his heart upon God's will. It was in solitude that Jesus became more attuned to his calling, what he was here to do. In our own lives, solitude can be a powerful tool for spiritual growth, for centering ourselves, to ridding ourselves of distractions, to focus on what's important. But we can often avoid quite easily quiet moments. Perhaps because they make us face our own hearts, our own struggles, our own distractions, the things that we keep on returning to, that we feel somehow we need this, when God is saying you don't. Jesus shows us, though, when we embrace solitude, when we cut loose from those things, we create space to hear God's voice more clearly. Maybe today you feel overwhelmed about something. Perhaps it is just the busyness of life. Perhaps it's the stress of a certain set of events. Perhaps it's a particular responsibility that has fallen upon you to fulfill. If that's you, I encourage you to find moments of solitude. Build in the habit of maybe a few moments in the morning, or a quiet walk in nature, or whatever it is that works for you, because we're each wired differently. And in those moments, whatever they look like for you, simply focus on being still and listening for God. In solitude, we can find not only our true selves, but we come to the reality, hopefully, that however lonely we've felt, however much alone or bearing the load we feel we have on our own, God has actually been with us. God is always with us. Psalm 139 says, "Where can I escape from your spirit?" It's written in a language that tells us the psalmist is saying, we can't. You are always with us, says the psalmist to God. So that's solitude. The second feature of Jesus' journey is simplicity. We read in verse 2, for 40 days Jesus was tempted. He ate nothing during those days, and at the end of them he was hungry. Jesus entered the wilderness with nothing, no food, no comforts, no distractions. It was just him, his body, and the Spirit of God. There's nothing complicated about this journey. It's a stripping away of all excess, a getting down to the basics. Simplicity is an often overlooked spiritual discipline. We live in a world that constantly feeds us with the message that more is always better. More possessions, more experiences, more comfort. But Jesus shows us that there is power in simplicity. The wilderness. In the wilderness, he's able to see things more clearly, to focus on what is truly essential. He has that distance from the hustle and bustle of everything else, the noise, that he can see those things in perspective. Jesus focuses on what's truly essential. His relationship with God, the coming kingdom, his obedience to what he's called to do. The temptations described in this passage are all attempts to draw Jesus away from that simple situation. Each temptation seeks to lure Jesus into focusing on physical desires or worldly power or success. But Jesus responds with simplicity, saying that life is not sustained by bread alone, but by every word that comes from heaven. How often do we complicate our lives with unnecessary things? We perhaps strive for possessions or status or achievements, thinking they will fulfill us. And yet, how often is it our experience that when we eventually get what we were after and have striven for, it all feels so empty? Because that isn't where fulfillment lies. So Jesus invites us to return to simplicity, to focus on what truly matters, loving the Lord our God with all our heart and strength and soul and might, and loving everyone else as we love ourselves. So today, consider what you might need to simplify in your life. It could be decluttering your physical space. In my experience, this takes two phases. One is I empty a large amount of the contents of my study into the garage. And until one day, eventually, Sally comes and says, the garage is too full. And then I meet some of you at the recycling centre as I try and empty carloads of my garage into the recycling. So it can mean decluttering our physical space. It can also mean decluttering our minds, our priorities, our diaries. So Jesus is, by example, saying, let go of distractions. Focus on the simplicity of walking with God. You may remember when he eventually sent out the 12 and then the 72. He said, don't take anything. Don't take anything. Travel lightly. Keep it simple. Finally, the wilderness is a place of fasting. For 40 days, Jesus goes without food. We now live in an age where we recognise that fasting from food is not a universally good thing to do. It's not healthy for everyone. If you are unwell, or if your relationship with food is a problematic relationship, then there is equal spiritual value in giving up something other than food. Think about what else you currently rely on that you struggle to live without, that you could give up for a time. Maybe it is, for some, that smartphone. Every time I say that, I think, have I turned it off? Particularly, I'd be grateful if I had turned it off, because it's in the coat over there and if it goes off, you'll all know. Maybe it's our relationship with alcohol, or books, or music, or perhaps coffee. We live in a society where I'm often reminded of that scene from the Airplane movie, where the captain comes over the tannoy and explains to them that the engine on the right wing is on fire, that we are preparing to land in the sea, and there's complete calm amongst the passengers. And then he adds, does the captain, and by the way, we've run out of coffee. And everyone goes, ah! The thought of going without coffee for some people is so strong that maybe that's what we should be fasting from, or entertainment, or shopping for new clothes, or whatever it is. Whatever it is that we're fasting from, the act of fasting is both a physical and a spiritual discipline. It teaches Jesus, it teaches us how to be more fully reliant on God and not this other stuff. Fasting is not simply about abstaining from something. It's about training our hearts and our bodies to depend more deeply on our Creator, and to focus more fully on doing what our Creator calls us to do. When we fast, we are acknowledging that our physical needs are temporary. Our spiritual need for God is eternal. In verse 3, Jesus is tempted with these words, if you are the Son of God, tell this stone to become bread. And Jesus is thereby tempted to use his divine power to satisfy what his body is hungering for. But Jesus responds, quoting from Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 3, it is written, people shall not live by bread alone. Jesus teaches us that while our bodies may crave food, our souls crave something far deeper. Our relationship with God is that we were created for. St. Augustine's great prayer is, our hearts are restless until they find their rest in you, the giver and sustainer of life. Fasting is an invitation to realign our desires and our priorities. It doesn't just focus on what we give up, but on what we seek to gain. We gain a deeper hunger for God's presence. We gain a deeper commitment to share in God's mission. So, for example, Isaiah 58 verse 6 speaks of fasting in terms of people choosing to put injustices right. If you've ever fasted before, then you'll have experience of what works for you. But if you've never fasted before, consider how you might incorporate fasting into your spiritual journey. For some of us, it may be safe to fast from food, and that's fine, try that. But for all of us, it could be fasting from anything that distracts our attention from God and God's call upon our lives to follow the way of Christ. And in the practice of fasting, we learn to depend on the Holy Spirit more fully, as Jesus depended on the Holy Spirit completely in the wilderness, and to seek a hunger for God that surpasses anything else we may be hungering for. The passage suggests that Jesus went into the wilderness partly through choice and partly because he was driven there by the Spirit. Sometimes we might choose a wilderness experience. Sometimes that wilderness experience is forced upon us, it seems. And it may be the case that you're living through such a wilderness experience at the moment. Jesus was driven into the wilderness for 40 days. He knows what that's like. So, this is a journey of solitude, simplicity and fasting. A journey that strips away all distractions, focuses on essentials and teaches us to depend on God. And as we journey through our own wilderness moments of struggle and uncertainty and even spiritual dryness, let's remember the simplicity of Jesus' approach. He didn't rely on his power or the comforts of the world. Instead, he embraced solitude. He simplified his focus. He fasted to center his heart on God's kingdom. And today, I challenge all of us in this time of Lent to reflect on our own approach to the wilderness journey. Are there areas in our lives that need solitude so that we can hear God more clearly about what we're called to do? Are we living in such a way that we are overwhelmed by complexity and stress and distraction? Or can we break free from that to the simplicity we're called to? Are we willing to fast from the things that pull us away from God and away from the person God's calling us to be? As we walk with Jesus through the wilderness, let's remember that it is in the simplicity of our journey that we often find the deepest communion with God.